December 2022, room SH216, the Dirksen Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C. The hearing was classified, closed to the public, senators only, plus cleared staff. The subject, U.S. military assistance to Egypt, specifically a State Department review that had been examining whether Egypt's human rights record met the statutory requirements for continued military aid under U.S. law. The review had the potential to delay or reduce hundreds of millions of dollars in annual military assistance. Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That committee oversees U.S. military assistance programs. The chair's informal influence over how those programs are administered and how the State Department's reviews are received in the Senate is substantial. Inside that classified hearing, according to the federal indictment that would be unsealed 9 months later in September 2023, Menendez used his position to advocate for the continuation of U.S. military aid to Egypt. Outside that hearing, Hanna was depositing money into a network of accounts that federal prosecutors would eventually trace to the Menendez household. The same month, the same subject, the same foreign government. One man chairing hearings on U.S. military aid to Egypt. One man depositing payments from the business entity that the Egyptian government's certification decisions had made extraordinarily profitable. One senator, one foreign military assistance program, one bribery scheme. This channel covers the cases that define what power does when it thinks no one is watching. Subscribe now. The United States provides Egypt with approximately $1.3 billion in annual military assistance. It has done so consistently since the 1979 Camp David Accords. The relationship is one of the longest-standing and most significant U.S. military assistance partnerships in the Middle East. It is also one of the most politically complicated. Egypt's human rights record has been a persistent source of tension in U.S.-Egypt relations. Congress periodically conditions military aid on human rights benchmarks, requiring the State Department to certify compliance before funds are released. In 2022, a State Department review was examining whether to withhold a portion of the military assistance, approximately $130 million, pending human rights improvements. The review was real. The potential for a funding delay was real. The Egyptian government had genuine interest in ensuring the review produced a favorable outcome. Senator Menendez chaired the committee that would have the most significant informal influence over how the State Department's review was received on the Hill. A committee chair who expressed support for Egypt's military aid relationship, or who declined to amplify criticism of the State Department's review, was performing a specific service for the Egyptian government. The federal indictment alleged that service was not free. Hanna's company, Is-E-G Halal, held an exclusive monopoly on halal food certification in Egypt. Halal certification in Egypt is a government-controlled process. The monopoly was a government contract worth tens of millions of dollars annually, awarded by Egyptian authorities. The indictment alleged that the monopoly was maintained and protected through Menendez's actions in his official capacity, that Hanna paid the Menendez household in gold bars, cash, and other instruments in exchange for those actions, and that those actions included the specific conduct described in the December 2022 classified hearing context, using his position to benefit Egypt's military assistance relationship with the United States. The forensic detail not publicly discussed in connection with the military aid angle, federal investigators identified a specific communication between Menendez and an official at the State Department in January 2023, following the December hearing in which Menendez's office raised the Egypt military aid review in terms that the State Department official later characterized to investigators as unusually specific and advocacy rather than inquiry. Advocacy rather than inquiry, from the chair of the committee that oversees military assistance in January 2023. During the period when Hanna's payments to the Menendez household were documented and ongoing. That communication is in the federal evidence file. Its specific content has not been publicly released. What would you make of a senator who uses his committee chairmanship to advocate for military aid to a foreign government, while that government's representatives are arranging payments to his household? Type A if this is the most serious element of the Menendez case. Type B if the physical evidence, the gold bars, the cash, is more legally significant. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee's formal authority over military assistance is significant but indirect. The committee does not appropriate funds. That is the Appropriations Committee. What the Foreign Relations Committee does is conduct oversight, hold hearings, and shape the legislative environment in which foreign policy decisions are made. A committee chair who speaks favorably about a country's military assistance relationship shifts the political landscape. State Department officials considering a politically controversial aid review take into account the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chair's posture. A chair who signals that aid delays will be received skeptically on the Hill is influencing the outcome without ever casting a vote. That is the informal power the indictment alleged Menendez exercised for Egypt. Not the power of legislation, the power of signal. Egypt received its military assistance. The 2022 review did not result in the $130 million delay that human rights organizations had advocated for. The full military assistance package was eventually released. The indictment does not claim that Menendez's actions were the sole factor in that outcome. It claims his actions were one factor, a factor for which he was paid. The jury agreed. On July 16, 2024, after 11 weeks of trial, the jury convicted Menendez on all 16 counts. The military aid angle, the foreign policy conduct, was part of the evidentiary record they evaluated. Guilty, every count. The non-public information angle is the detail that connects the military aid conduct to the broader scheme in the most damaging way. Federal investigators determined that Menendez transmitted non-public foreign policy information to individuals connected to the Egyptian government. Information obtained through his classified briefings, information that was not available to the public. A senator receiving classified briefings on U.S. military assistance policy and transmitting that information to the foreign government with a financial interest in that policy. That is the conduct the sentencing judge addressed when she imposed 11 years. She did not pause. Your engagement shapes which cases this channel investigates. Comment 11 if 11 years reflects the gravity of what Menendez did with his committee chairmanship. Subscribe to follow the Second Circuit appeal. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee has a new chair. The committee continues its work. The hearing rooms in the Dirksen building are occupied by different members. The Egypt military assistance relationship continues. The annual appropriations process cycles through Congress each year. Human rights reviews are conducted. Aid packages are certified and released. The man who allegedly shaped that process in exchange for gold bars is serving an 11-year sentence, or he will be once the appellate process concludes. The appeal is pending in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. The gold bars are in federal evidence storage. The classified communication from January 2023, advocacy rather than inquiry, is in the evidence file. The Egypt Military Assistance Program continues at approximately $1.3 billion annually. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee chair continues to have informal influence over how that program is perceived on the Hill. A different chair, with a different financial disclosure form. The structural position is the same. The position that Menendez allegedly rented to Egypt for gold bars and cash still exists. It will always exist because the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will always exist, and its chair will always have informal influence over U.S. foreign military assistance decisions. What changed on July 16, 2024 is the specific person in that chair and the specific answer to the question of what their chairmanship was worth in the commercial market for foreign government access. Menendez answered that question. The jury heard the answer. The judge sentenced accordingly. 11 years. The position is still there. The appeal is running. The classified communication from January 2023 is in the evidence file. Advocacy rather than inquiry. Egypt got its military assistance. The chair is different now. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee meets on its regular schedule. The world continues. Subscribe. The Second Circuit will rule on the appeal eventually. When it does, this channel will have the full analysis of what the appellate court said about the classified evidence, the non-public information transmission, and the military aid advocacy that was at the center of the most consequential foreign bribery case in Senate history. 11 years, gold bars, 480 in cash. And one classified communication in January 2023 that a State Department official described as advocacy rather than inquiry. That phrase is in the federal evidence file. It is also in its own way the entire case. Advocacy rather than inquiry. From the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. While the payments were ongoing, the $1.3 billion in annual U.S. military assistance to Egypt funds a specific set of capabilities: F-16 fighter aircraft maintenance, M1 Abrams tank maintenance and upgrades, Apache helicopter support, naval vessel upkeep, training programs for Egyptian military officers at U.S. installations. These are not abstract budget lines. They are specific defense relationships that determine what the Egyptian military can do and how well it can do it. The annual aid package is, in practical terms, a significant component of Egypt's military maintenance budget. A delay in that aid, triggered by a State Department human rights review that found the statutory benchmarks unmet, would affect those capabilities. It would affect the Egyptian government's military planning. It would affect the country's regional posture. The Egyptian government understood this. That understanding is why access to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chair was valuable enough to pay for. The $130 million that was at risk in the 2022 review is not a large number relative to the total military assistance package, but it represents a signal. A $130 million delay would have communicated to the Egyptian government that the human rights conditions attached to U.S. military aid were real and enforceable. That communication has its own strategic value, beyond the dollar amount. The Menendez indictment alleged that the signal was prevented, that the State Department's review was navigated without triggering the $130 million delay, that the Egyptian government's relationship with U.S. military assistance was maintained without disruption, and that the cost of that maintenance was paid to a senator's household in gold bars. The jury evaluated that sequence. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty, all 16 counts. The specific dollar amounts of the bribery payments, approximately $150,000 in gold bars, $480,000 in cash, are dwarfed by the $1.3 billion in annual military assistance those payments allegedly protected. $630,000 total for an uninterrupted $1.3 billion annual program? That ratio is worth sitting with. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee exercises informal influence over a program valued at $1.3 billion annually. The indictment alleged that influence was rented for $630,000 in gold bars and cash. Whether that represents a fair market price for the access provided, whether the Egyptian government overpaid, underpaid, or paid exactly what the market determined, is not a question the jury addressed. It is a question the case raises. And it is a question about the U.S. foreign policy process that outlasts the verdict. The committee chair has influence. That influence has value to foreign governments. The question the Menendez case makes unavoidable is, under what circumstances does that value translate into an illegal transaction? The answer the law provides: when there is a documented quid pro quo, when specific official acts are exchanged for specific payments. The answer the case provides: the documentation can be forensic, financial, and testimonial. The gold bars had serial numbers. The cash had ATM withdrawal sequences. The communications had State Department witnesses who described them as advocacy rather than inquiry. The documentation existed. The jury read it. 11 years. Subscribe. The Second Circuit appeal is the next chapter. This channel will have the full appellate analysis when the court rules. The December 2022 hearing is in the Senate's classified record. Permanent. The January 2023 communication is in the federal evidence file. Permanent. The gold bars are in evidence storage, permanent. The verdict is in the Southern District's case file, permanent. The appeal is in the Second Circuit, pending. And the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is meeting on its regular schedule. Different chair, same room. Same position, same informal influence. Same $1.3 billion in annual military assistance. The program continues. The gold bars are in storage. The chair is different. The structural reality is exactly the same. Advocacy rather than inquiry. Those 4 words are in the evidence file. They describe what one senator did with his chairmanship. They describe what one foreign government purchased. They describe why 11 years is the sentence. And they describe the specific gap in the U.S. foreign policy process that allowed the transaction to be possible for as long as it was. Subscribe, the appeal is running, this channel will be here. The hearing room in the Dirksen building is occupied. Different senator, different financial disclosure form. Same room. The same view of the Capitol from the window. Everything changed on July 16, 2024. Nothing structural changed at all. There is a specific feature of the Menendez case's military assistance angle that received less attention than the gold bars and the cash, and that deserves more. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee chair's influence over military assistance is primarily informal. It operates through signals, through staffing relationships, through the political environment the chair helps create. It is not legislative authority in the direct sense. That informality is both the mechanism of the influence and the challenge of prosecuting it. When a committee chair advocates for a foreign government's position, the line between legitimate foreign policy engagement and corrupt official action depends almost entirely on the underlying financial relationship. A senator who believes, on the merits, that U.S.-Egypt military assistance should continue is permitted, expected even, to say so and to act accordingly. A senator who believes the same thing but is being paid by a beneficiary of that policy is not permitted to act on that belief in his official capacity without disclosing the payment relationship. The law does not prohibit reaching the right conclusion. It prohibits reaching the right conclusion because you are being paid to. The distinction is internal. It lives in the senator's knowledge of the payment and his awareness that his official actions were serving the interests of the payer. Proving that distinction requires the financial forensics, the communications evidence, and the testimonial record that the prosecution assembled over years. The jury found that the distinction was proven, beyond a reasonable doubt, for all 16 counts. The Egyptian government did not testify at the trial. No Egyptian official appeared in a U.S. federal courtroom. The case was built around the American actors, Menendez, Hanna, the co-defendants, and the documentary record of what money moved and what official acts followed. The Egyptian government's role is described in the indictment but not prosecuted. The Egyptian government officials who allegedly benefited from Menendez's conduct are not named as defendants. They are referenced as Egyptian officials and Egyptian government interests throughout the charging documents. Those individuals are in Egypt. They are beyond U.S. criminal jurisdiction. The case against Menendez could be built without them. The full story of what the Egyptian government sought, what it received, and how it evaluated the arrangement. That story is not in any U.S. federal courtroom. It is in Cairo. It may never be in a U.S. courtroom. What is in a U.S. courtroom? What is in the Southern District of New York's permanent record is the 11-year verdict. And the January 2023 communication. Advocacy rather than inquiry. A State Department official described a communication from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chair that way, under oath, to federal investigators. That description is in the evidence file. It is the most precise four-word summary of what the Menendez case is actually about. Not the gold bars, though they are vivid. Not the cash in the clothing, though it is striking. Not the Mercedes, though it is symbolic. The January 2023 communication, the advocacy, the military aid, the committee chair. 4 words. The appeal is running in the Second Circuit. The Second Circuit will evaluate the evidence, including the January 2023 communication, including whether the advocacy it describes was proven, beyond a reasonable doubt, to be connected to the payments. The jury answered yes. The appellate court will either affirm that answer or it will not. 11 years, gold bars, $480,000 in cash. Advocacy rather than inquiry. Those 4 words. Subscribe. The Second Circuit's ruling will be the next major development in the most consequential Senate bribery case in modern American history. This channel will be there. The hearing room is occupied. The program continues. The appeal is running. Advocacy rather than inquiry. 4 words in a federal evidence file. In the Dirksen building, room SH216, the classified hearing room is still used for classified hearings. Different senator, same view. The program continues at $1.3 billion annually. The appeal is pending. The 11 years are waiting.